Of sailing in the big yachts in the 1920s. My grandfather bought the Truant about 1921 or 22, and you'll see pictures of her here. And my father kept a logbook in 1922, I think, and 1923. No, sorry, 1923 and 1924. And it's very well written, and some of the sailing incidents in it, it's all I'm going to show you, give you know, the flavour of the sailing at the times. And you'll be surprised how little has changed. That was it back there. There we go. Well, this is a picture we have in the club, and it shows some of the big yachts: Callista, Marita, Villuan, Witch, Foam and Syringa. And these 6 boats, 3 are actually from Lough Ree, Callista with D. Moran, Villuan with Parker Hutchinson, and Syringa with one of the Wallers. And then Amarita is from Athlone, from Lough Ree, as is Witch, as is Foam by the Listers. So that's the first, just to give you the idea of what it was like. And this is the Truant that my grandfather bought over on the left. And of all these yachts that sailed at the regattas in Lough Ree in the teens, 20s and 30s, the Truant is the only one that survives, and she's an absolutely magnificent 8-metre, and there she is today, well, perhaps last year, but sailing on the Clyde, where she started and to which she has returned. And this is the title page, Log of the 8-metre Yacht, the Truant, being some account of her races and voyages in the summer of 1923, together with the adventures, sufferings, deprivations, and pleasures of her crew, dedicated to those optimists who persist in spite of hail, rain, bitter cold, and a scarif wind in calling the months of July and August 1923 by the name of summer. And this is our film of the Truant sailing, and I don't know how to make it work. Give it a go. And this is to give you an idea of this boat. It's the last of the Lough Ree boats. She was actually built on the Clyde by the famous boat builders there, and that's where she's gone back to. And she was commissioned by the Commodore of the Royal Yacht Squadron in 1910, and that's her on the left. You see, she's absolutely magnificent boat. And then she went to Norway during the First World War, so she wouldn't be commandeered by the Navy. And my grandfather, he must have died or something, the Commodore, and my grandfather bought her from Norway. He hadn't seen her, and a boy and a man sailed her from Norway to Ireland, and then she came up to Lough Ree. And she was here during the 20s and during the 1930s. William Fife was the builder, and she, length overall, was 41 feet, and waterline 27 feet. So there she goes. That just gives you a shot of her sailing. How can we go back to her? So she is definitely the last of the yachts to sail in Lough Ree at that time, of the wooden yachts. There we go. And this is some of the crew of the Truant who are mentioned in the account. Buster Kelly on the left from Abbey House, Tom Kelly's father, if you know him. My own father in the middle, and Johnny Duffy from St. Kieran's Terrace on the right, who was the paid hand, because the maintenance on one of these boats was absolutely massive, and therefore you needed a paid hand to look after them. So this is an incident off View Point on the 8th of August 1923. Wind and sea rising, southeast of View Point. Syringa ahead, Ruby next, with more inshore. Foam a little astern of both, and inside Syringa, Callista half a mile astern of all. Johnny Duffy and I were forward taking in the spinnaker, Kelly amidships. We all had our backs towards the bow. Suddenly we heard a shout from Bolton. Syringa's up, bear away to hell. Skipper said, what about the jibe? Bolton replied, damn the jibe. You'll break her to smithereens if you strike the gear. Bear away to hell. Away we bore. And this is the scene pictured in the log of the shallow from View Point and the boats running up on the shallow and truant skating out just beyond the mere. Away we bore, and as we did, we saw Syringa strike. Inshore of our Ruby, with every stitch drawing, struck about 10 seconds later. It was a most extraordinary sight. Foam then came up on top of Syringa, and she too struck. There were 3 ships, one on top of the other, and all hard aground with every stitch drawing in a half gale from the south. Their heads were buried with the press of canvas, and their counters stood up in the air. We missed by inches, and the whole scene was so terrible. Boats piled on top of each other, canvas tearing, ropes and spars flying in all directions, the shouts and curses of the crews, the seas breaking all over. The whole effect was so terrifying that almost all our crew gave a wild, hysterical shout as we passed and found that we had missed the show. And this is some of the crew of the Truant here. They're actually cruising in the rain at this stage. Johnny Duffy has, I think, the sheet here. This is my grandfather looking pretty wet and grumpy on the helm. This is my grandmother over here. This is her nephew, Jack Malidi here. And this is the Commodore's great aunt, Miss Milligan. One wonders, was there something going on? It wasn't with Johnny Duffy or my grandfather. This is another incident from the same regatta. Coming up to U Point Mark, we had a little unpleasantness with Dorothy. We had that's a boat that was actually owned by Bunty Mills, I think, but was sailed by the Wallers of this regatta. We had established an overlap and demanded water at the flag. This at first he refused to allow his wife, who was at the helm, to give. But at length he changed his tune. We announced that we were going to take the flag off him, come what might, and that if his wife was killed in the collision, as appeared probable at the time, her blood be upon his head. And the punchline, Waller gave away. Many of you will have travelled up and down between the regattas, and it's always a time of high adventure with engines breaking down, heavy seas, and you're stuck trying to cross Lough Ree, and a certain amount of drinking and general fun of one sort or another. So this is just an account from the log of an incident in Lough Ree, and it involved the Rambler, the Shanksha, an angry Lough Ree, and Mickey Donlan, amongst others. So what happened? And I just read the extract from the log because whatever I did with it. Yes, here it is. And it gives you the flavour of the scene. The scene is Lough Ree in August 1923, with the Rambler heading south to Drummondere Regatta. She's towing the Shanksha, because the Shanksha at that time was a dumb boat. That's to say, she didn't have an engine, she was just a houseboat. And behind the Shanksha was the sailing yacht, the Dorothy, that belonged to Bunty Mills. What's wrong about the previous one? At about 11:30, in the middle of the night, note, 11:30 p.m., there was a great sea running, says the log. By midnight, the Rambler crew, never at any time good sailors, completely lost their heads with terror. They hailed the Shanksha and begged for God's sake to send Mickey Donlan aboard. Mickey was the lady's paid hand, the great boatman. A punt was let back on the end of the line, and Mickey climbed down the stem of the Shanksha. He was then hauled up alongside the Rambler and he got on board. In the sea then running, this was a great feat, and no praise is too much for it. Once aboard, he took the helm, and things were going well again until about 1 p.m, when the Rambler's engine began to knock, and in a few minutes had stopped altogether. The situation now got rapidly worse. The Rambler swung broadside on and began to blow down on the Shanksha. The latter boat also broached to, and in a short time the two were together at the bow. The rolling of the two was terrific, and serious damage was suffered by both before they could be got apart. The two boats were rolling scuppers under, and at one moment it was thought that the Shanksha was going over altogether. Healy, her skipper, gave the order to jump for it, and he and Malidi managed to scramble onto the Rambler. The two boats at once rolled apart, and it was some moments before Early, the third member of the crew, was able to get on board. On the Rambler, all was chaos. Her own crew was in a hopeless state, befuddled by drink and terror. And the engine driver wouldn't even try to get his motor going again. The crew of the Shanksha now took charge and endeavoured to get out an anchor and thereby get her head to wind. But the fair lead in the bow carried away, and the chain ran along the beam, and once again she was brought to broadside on. There was no opportunity of making the fall of the anchor chain, and the four men, Healy, Early, Malidi and Donlan, were forced to remain on deck all night, holding on to it. With the rolling, 2 barrels of oil on the Rambler's deck went overboard, taking all the rail and the port beam and quarter with them. The anchor, however, held, and the Shanksha drifted away to leeward till she was brought up by her line. Astern of her there was still tied the Dorothy. With the dawn, the engine was got going, and the sea having ice abated, the Shanksha was towed under the lee of the Currageen Islands and there anchored, and the Rambler then proceeded to Drumineer. I've been through a good many of those adventures. Though I don't think we ever came to the stage of almost turning over. So they give, and this wonderful picture that Vincent produced, which shows the start of a race off Lough Ree. The Truant is here, and some of the other boats, I don't know which is which, over here in the end. These are just some extracts from that log of 1923 to give the flavour of sailing and boating on the river at that time, and you'll see that little has changed.